Hello, my name is Jordyn and I'm your host.
And I'm Insha, the co-host. And I'm really excited today because not only do we have a wonderful topic to talk about, we also have a wonderful guest to talk the topic about. So today we're joined by Crystal from Each Mind. People who listen to our podcast, you may have seen her before. So welcome back, Crystal. I hope you're doing great.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for inviting me back, Jordyn and Insha, and everyone else from Forever Blooming. I'm Crystal, I use she, her pronouns, and in case this is the first time you've heard my voice, I'm from Each Mind, which is a youth-started nonprofit organization that is really dedicated to decreasing mental health stigma, so we are very aligned with the values of Forever Blooming, and I am super excited to be here today to talk about our exciting topic.
Absolutely, and we're definitely excited to have you come back anytime. There is an open door.
Definitely.
So today we will be talking a little bit about our view on mental health within each community. And if you guys were not aware, I'm very Black, Insha is very Indian, and Crystal is Southeastern Asian. And so we'll just talk about how our own communities view mental health. If you do want to learn more about other minorities and how they view mental health, I would definitely encourage you to do your own research and view people's stories, because it's good to just be open-minded and learn all about everyone's stories. Then we will later be talking about how society views each community in regards to mental health. And lastly, we'll be talking about how this affected our relationship with mental health, whether that is community issues and societal issues. So, yeah.
And this is Forever Blooming.
Awesome. And if you guys did not listen to last 2 weeks episode, we did introduce a new segment. It's called Rose, Thorn, Bud. But if you are not aware, our Rose, Thorn, Bud is basically Rose being a highlight, success, small win, or something positive that happened today or within the last week. Or Thorn is a challenge you experienced or something you can use more support with. And lastly, our Bud is new ideas that have blossomed or something that you're looking forward to knowing more about or experiencing. So if you guys would mind, I would love to go first.
Yes, go ahead.
So Crystal and Insha already know about this, but my rose is definitely the date that I went on yesterday. He was so sweet, and I could ramble on all about that, but I don't want to take up too much time. My thorn would definitely just be getting used to school and work and Forever Blooming and everything, and trying to keep track of my time, track everything right, not be so stressed out with all the priorities that I have going on, just be more organized, which I did say last time, but I'm still figuring it out, but it's okay. Lastly, my bud would just be to hear all about Crystal's and Insha's experiences and learning more about other people's view on mental health within each minority, which we will be doing in this episode, so how convenient.
Yeah, that was super nice. Crystal, do you mind if I go for a second? Okay. So my rose would probably be, yesterday I went to this sort of like a religious place. I'm not really a religious person, but that was nice. And they had these songs playing. So it's called Kavali, and it's super amazing. And I had a lot of fun there. My thorn would probably be, again, getting used to school, because school is so challenging and it's driving me crazy. But hopefully I'll get used to it for I'll just give it time. And my bud, okay, so it'll be probably just to be happy and positive, because since school is so overwhelming, it again drives me crazy. So to be calm and contained and just be happy and positive and productive. So that'll be my bud probably.
Yeah, very happy that you got to go to that religious event, even though I know you're not religious, and very happy for you, Jordyn, that your date went well. For me, my rose was that I am honestly really excited about this mental health event that my friend and I are going to be putting on for our school district soon. So it's in person, which is a big change from last year, and very excited about that, and all the fun pictures and all the fun memories we'll make during that event. also very excited for like the impact the event might have on our community. So big rose there, very big blooming rose.
Yes.
And then for my thorn, I have a lot to do today, which I'm a little bit worried about, but also like mainly more worried about like my sleep, because I realized that I am like sort of like dozing off in a lot of my classes, even though I try really hard to stay awake.
Same.
But that's what happens when you get 4 hours of sleep, which is something we do not recommend at all. Do not be like Crystal in that that respect. But for my bud, I am really excited about a new friendship that I might be forming with like some people in my classes. So I always like making new friends, and there's some really interesting people this year. But sorry for the long ramble there, but yeah, that's my rose thorn.
It's totally okay.
Thank you.
That's amazing.
I hope that the mental health event goes super well. We love mental health, and especially with your friendships and everything like that. And get the sleep you need.
Yeah, I was saying the same thing. Get the sleep, Crystal. You can't survive on 4 hours. Trust me, I do that every day, and I just literally by the end of the day, I'm like on my bed flat out.
I know.
Oh my God, take care of yourselves. Oh my God. Just to get it pushing, thank you guys for sharing your rose thorn bud. Amazing news. Also kind of sad news with sleep and with school stress. But moving on, today again we will be talking a little bit about minority mental health. So quick disclaimer, I do want to say all research used in this episode is United States based, because it is very hard to get global statistics as much as I would love to. But our first topic will definitely be about our view on mental health within each community, and we will be breaking this section up into common stigmas and to different stigmas, which each community has, I guess, if you can phrase it that way. One of the common stigmas we came up with is that mental health isn't important. I have heard that so much in my own family.
Literally. Like whenever, I mean, I'm a person who's deeply interested in, again, mental health and psychology. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. So when I tell people this, they always are like so shocked. I'm really surprised why they're shocked, but they're like shocked, and they always question my motives. They're like, what's so interesting about it? Why does it interest you? I'm like, everybody has a mental health, right? And it should interest not just me, but everyone, because mental health, taking care of mental health is as important as physical well-being, and you just can't rely on being physically well and just ignoring your mental health. And this is such a common stigma that it just annoys me that people kind of treat it as, you know, unimportant, because again, as I said, everyone has a mental health, and taking care of it as equally is, you know, it's important as doing other stuff, like you do your chores and stuff like that. It's just as important as that. So I mean, this happens. And I mean, I'll share a statistic as well. 17% of black people and 23% of Native Americans live with a mental illness, and people who identify as belonging to 2 or more races are most likely to report any mental illnesses within the past year than any other racial, ethnic group. So you could see how this stigma affects the lives of like minorities and, you know, people from different races or ethnic groups.
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly. Adding on to like what Insha is talking about like minorities, just like as a whole, like racial minorities, especially like in the United States, and also like this might apply, like mainly applies globally, is that like the mental health of minorities just isn't that like important as a whole, because what we've seen throughout like history is that minorities and people of like different, like non-white people basically are often dehumanized, and because we are dehumanized and used as like for my own race, like Asian, like a lot of Chinese immigrants were used as pretty much free labor, and that like black people were literally enslaved for like hundreds and hundreds of years. And same thing with like what we see with colonization is points that like because we've all been dehumanized, we've all had our mental health like as minorities be sort of like cast away as unimportant, you know, and that's why we see those statistics like what Insha is talking about right now or was talking about.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, because minorities, that's why they're minorities. They're in less quantity, so they're like easy to easy to suppress, easy to oppress. So their mental health throughout centuries and decades has just been treated unimportant, and this just leads to more and more minorities not getting the treatment they deserve and they want. So yeah,
absolutely. I do want to say that along with that sort of belief about mental health being unimportant, that it is very like internalized and then kind of stigmatized to the point where people think that mental health is basically a weakness. Showing your vulnerability is a weakness, which obviously Forever Blooming is trying to combat, because that's literally in our mission statement. Like, go to our about section, it's like embrace vulnerability. But that being said, I have heard from my mother that many statements that are just talked about, well, let me rephrase that. I've heard my mother say many times that mental health is a weakness, and showing like your vulnerability is a weakness. For example, she'll say things like, why are you crying? You don't need to cry. Don't show people your sadness, because then they'll make fun of you, or things like that, or just shaming me for crying in general. Like, wipe your face.
Yeah, I just want to say that whenever, I totally agree with what you said, and the same with, in my family, since India is a place with such stigmatized, ideas and people and everyone. But yeah, so whenever mental health comes in, people sort of toss that topic away, and they're like, okay, we're not going to talk about it, because first of all, again, the stigma attached to it, it's just to a point where people don't even want to talk about it. And second is that when they talk about it, they treat it as if it's just like a liability on your head. You just like, that it's there. You just need to, if you are suffering from a mental illness, you need to get away from it as soon as possible, because for them it's embarrassing that a person from their family has depression, has anxiety, because they treat it again as if it's unimportant, first of all, and a weakness, because if you have a mental illness, then you're weak, then you're just you're different from everyone else, and that's definitely not a case, because we are humans, and as humans we're like allowed to feel every single emotion, and to treat it as a weakness is just not good on our part as such. And that's definitely not a great thing to do, because that just makes people afraid or embarrassed, just scared to kind of reach out for help. And because they're oppressed, they're judged, and just ruins the relationship they have with the people around them. And this is what I was actually going to talk about next, that it just oppresses them, because there's a lot of stigma, a lot of judgment. And again, giving a statistic that research has shown that BIPOC groups are less likely to have access to mental health services. They're less likely to seek out treatment, more likely to receive low or poor quantity of care, and more likely to end services early. So that's again what we're talking about, minorities, and how again the stigma for them separately is a really big obstacle, for them getting proper treatment that they deserve. So again, what do you think about that, guys?
Yeah, I guess I can.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Go ahead.
No, you can go.
No,
Sorry
it's okay.
about that.
I give me some time to I have so much I want to say. You can go ahead.
I was literally going to say that there's definitely a tie between viewing mental health as a weakness and being unable to reach out for help, because definitely, again, like my mother shaming me for crying or shaming me for feeling emotions, there definitely is that sort of strain in our relationship in regards to just mental health in general. And I've heard other family outside of my close family talk about my depression and talk about my anxiety, and stigmatize it to the point where I'm just seen as a very weird person or a very whitewashed person just for having a mental illness. But what were you gonna say?
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead. I'm just interrupting you. I'm so sorry.
I was gonna ask Crystal what she was gonna say.
No, that like what you said about the last part about like seeming whitewashed for having like a mental. Is it okay if I ask if that comes from like the perception that Black people always need to like be strong, or that your community always has to like persevere through everything? I think
and and in India, basically the idea of mental health and mental well-being is all really foreign to them, to Indian people. And as Jordyn talked about being whitewashed, it's just when this topic comes into play, or when it is being talked about, it always people always make it seem as if it's a concept that is not a part of the Indian society but a foreign culture that people are just being influenced by, and so they're just like kind of incorporating in their lives that, oh, I have a mental illness, oh, I'm so cool. So it's appeared as if it's just a thing that people talk about, or just a thing that people kind of say because they want to sound cool, or just because they're really influenced by the culture outside India. And that's definitely not the case, because I mean, again, mental health everyone has, and they feel different sort of emotions and things, and it's definitely not a thing to look cool about, because it's just not a thing like that. So yeah.
For sure, yeah, and I totally can see how like a lot of cool people, like that's the same thing kind of sort of here, at least at my, like I remember in middle school a lot, and also still in like high school, like if you have like something going on personally and like you share it with maybe like quote unquote too many people, like when that gets around, like people will like talk about you in a really weird way. And when you're a minority, and that's why I was asking you that, Jordyn, because although I definitely feel like the Black community like gets a huge like the forefront of that like stereotype of minorities needing to be strong, I think there's like a little like underlying assumption of a lot of like white communities that we as minorities champion ourselves so much and being like really strong, and we are strong, right? But there's a difference between minorities like us, like all of us, being like so resilient in how we've overcome our hurdles and still having like our own issues. Like just because we are very cool and that we are like so like resilient and courageous as a community to thrive despite like white supremacy doesn't mean that white supremacy has stopped affecting us, right? Like I don't know where that logic is coming from, where people just expect like people will like see a minority like celebrating their own like having pride in their own race, or like celebrating their own accomplishments, and then turn around and think, oh wait, like that person has like diagnosed depression, that is a perfect opportunity for me to stigmatize that. Like I don't know where that comes from, right? And it's just, it's so much.
Yeah, minorities have their own problems going on, and to add on top of it, if they have mental illnesses, then people likely are going to stigmatize it because they think, oh, it's a minority. I mean, we can easily suppress them, and we can easily stigmatize their mental illnesses, and make it appear as if it's something just a bad thing to have, something like that. Definitely, I agree with whatever you talked about. And also, as you mentioned, that people do it to look cool and everything. So on social media, I've seen people making jokes about having depression or anxiety. So I feel like that's extremely offensive for not just like people in general who have anxiety or depression. They treat it as if it's something, I mean, like we talked about minority mental health basically, and they seem to be really ignorant towards the minority mental health by, doing stuff like that. So I definitely think it's not a good thing to just, talk. I mean, of course, you may have mental health problems, but it's not just cool to rant out about them all the time and just making jokes about it, even though that may be for your own satisfaction, but that sometimes can come off as offensive, and that definitely is ignorant towards the minority. I feel like, because they somehow incorporate the idea of minority being unimportant, minorities mental health being unimportant in their jokes.
Yeah, exactly. And that like idea that you're talking about, Insha, of like those jokes that are like insensitively made, and those like comments that are like, and all of that judgment really just leads to what Jordyn was talking about earlier, that like we as minorities are sometimes unable to reach out for help, because, and it's so like valid for us to feel that way, because I think like in a lot of, especially when it was like in my mind when I was younger, it was like because I was judged like by this person, like I was, you know, perceived to be like the model minority, and we'll talk about this later, I know, but like I was perceived to be like the like all strong Asian like minority girl who's like able to get through this. And because someone treated me like this in the past, it's like in my thought process and the thought process of a lot of other Asian teens is like, and minority teens is like, what if like my parents react this way, or what if like an adult reacts this way when the time comes for me to like actually ask to see a therapist? What if my therapist reacts this way if I tell them about this? It's like this sort of like trauma that when it happens once, that it could happen again.
Absolutely. And I do want to just wrap up these little comments, stigma section, because this conversation is very, very important. But there is a really powerful quote that I found on the internet. It does talk a little bit about African American community, but this definitely can be applied to a lot of minority communities in general. So the quote is by Victor Armstrong, a member of the National Council for Behavioral Health Board of Directors. That was a mouthful. And he said, for many in the African American community, our story is one of perseverance and resilience. After all, we survived slavery. Surely we can survive sadness or anxiety. In this mindset, anything less would be considered a spiritual or moral weakness. The problem, in part, is that we often fail to recognize that mental illness is much more than feeling melancholy or anxious. It is not a sign of weakness and does not discriminate based on skin color.
Wow, that was
Can
amazing.
we put like, just, I know this is in the podcast, but that needs to be like on both of our organizations' Instagram somewhere. Like, that is such a powerful
That is
quote.
amazing.
Absolutely. It is. We love Victor Armstrong. You just spoke volumes. So moving on a little bit.
That guy.
So moving on a little bit to different stigmas, because it's definitely important to touch every area we can get within this small episode. We can talk a little bit about colonialism and queerness and how that ties into minority mental health, which, Crystal, you can take this away because I know you got a big brain up there that would love to explain this.
Oh my gosh, for people who didn't, for everyone, I just put my hand over my mouth when Jordyn said that because I was like, oh, but yes, I constantly am ranting about colonialism and queerness, but to anyone, just as like a very quick crash course, to how colonialism affects like queerness, and especially like the queerness of a lot of racial minorities, is that around like the 1800s and also 1900s, when a lot of European countries started colonizing African, South American, and Asian, like South Asian, East Asian, all of Asia, when like colonization started happening, a lot of these European countries, specifically like Britain, started imposing policies that criminalized any sort of like homosexual behavior, like gay sex. And what that did was that had a huge effect on existing queer populations in those countries. And I want to emphasize like the word existing, because the idea that queer people have not, and also I'm queer, by the way, for anyone who's listening to this, I am speaking, I am not speaking on behalf of the queer community, I am part of the queer community. But that being said, we love to see it. That's so true. But that being said, I want to emphasize the word existing, because we as queer people and queer people of color have existed throughout history. Like the notion that queer people like never existed, and that like, you know, the idea of people being trans or non-binary is like a 21st century ideal is not true. Like, you can read academia and you can like, you know, do your own research and find out that queerness in like different cultures, especially in like South Asian cultures and also Southeast Asian cultures, has always been there. And the reason why it was like the reason why you might see like a lot more modern day Asian people be homophobic is as a result of British imperialism. Like, it is not a result of it is not as much of a result of like, for example, Southeast Asian people being like deliberately homophobic. It's because they were imposed a system that was like unfair to them, and that system ended up like criminalizing people's identities to the point where it just wasn't safe to be queer anymore. And that's very understandable how it affected like the mindsets of now modern like Indian people or Southeast Asian people. So I hope that makes sense, that like those like that like queerness and colonialism and like racial minorities is very intertwined in like our history, and how we perceive like the mental health of like queer people of color as well. That's like very also affected by colonialism.
Yeah, it's so ironic that British people in, the previous century, they talked about modernizing when they came to India basically to kind of trade, and then they took over the, working system of India and everything. They talked about modernizing India and making it like an appropriate place to live, where, because at that time they thought at least that England was at a higher level than India. And they talked about, it's really ironic that they talked about modernizing, but they made it illegal to be sort of to be a queer person, and it's just it's a really ironic thing. It makes me laugh, but I'm not really laughing. Yeah, and that really just impacted the idea of queerness just in India basically, because now it's again treated as like, if you call someone queer, it's an insult. And I don't think why, because it has been in our country for centuries, but during British time it kind of depleted because of their idea of what queerness should be viewed as. But I feel like now it's definitely starting to grow a little more because, more people are coming up and telling their stories, and it's really important that people do so, because that just helps to sort of raise awareness about this idea, because throughout centuries it has been depleted and completely demolished into something that is equivalent to an insult, and that is just not right on the part of I'm a straight person on our part as well, and it's not just to the queer people as well. That's what I feel.
And we love a straight ally.
Yeah, it's a lot, and I hope that we can emphasize to our audience that queerness is always going to be tied to mental health, which is why we're talking about the mental health of queer people of color and how their identities. It's just so much harder sometimes to at least for me, it was really hard to sort of come to terms with my own queerness because of those ideals that those European ideals that were sort of ingrained into my parents and my grandparents and the generations before then, right? And it's we are directly impacted by that, no matter what people might say about how far in history it was. It wasn't even far in history. If any historian knows that anything that was 100 or 200 years ago still has huge implications on different countries and different cultures today. So yeah.
Absolutely. That was definitely a good
Yeah.
You can go.
Go on, sorry. I'm just interrupting everyone today. It's so I'm so sorry.
It's okay. I was just gonna say it's definitely important to touch on that. I really appreciate you giving a history lessons for all of us, because even though I do know colonialism has affected too much of how we live today. So it's definitely important to talk about.
Yeah. So now I'm we're kind of moving into the academic part of mental health and how it affects minorities as such. So basically, I'm an Indian person, and I can only speak for myself, not for the other communities, other countries. So I'll just be talking what I've experienced so far. So I've realized that Indian people, Southeast Asian and East Asian people, they're doing academically well, and because they've been doing that well from decades, it's been it's a common notion attached, it's a common stigma, or just a common thing attached to all Asian people as such, that they have to do academically well, and if they don't, they're a failure as a person. And I've experienced that. I've been told that I'm a failure as a person by my teachers, and that absolutely devastated me. I was in 4th grade actually, by the way.
What?
Yeah, and
Oh my
she told, yeah, I just moved to like a big city from like a small place, and I wasn't really exposed much to how they worked and how they, you know, handled everything in school. So I was really overwhelmed. But then she told me this, so that absolutely broke me, and I didn't do that good that year. But yeah, so academic pressure is intense in India to a point where you know, suicide rates are just increasing every day by like, I don't know, huge numbers. I don't really have the statistics, I'm sorry, but yeah, because they have been told, and this just puts them in a state of mind where they don't have like an escape. You know, they just are trapped in this labyrinth that they can't escape out of. They're just they're going all over the cycle again and again. They are, you know, academically challenged, then they talk to their parents about it. The parents say that it's not important to focus on your studies because you're going to get nowhere without it, and then they just become depressed again and they don't have an escape out of it. So that's why suicide rates are just escalating, you know, by millions and millions every single day. And it's just so heartbreaking that how students who want to reach out to their help, they do that, but then, you know, their parents, who are obviously have an orthodox mindset, they don't give mental health much importance. They just treat it as if it's just like, again, you know, a weakness or something, just influenced by the American or the European culture, and they're just saying this. They just, you know, kind of toss it away. And the person, of course, they can't, I mean, they approach their parents, they approach their teachers. What can they do? Now they're just depressed, right? So that's a big thing in India, basically. And also to kind of, when you grow up, you're either forced to take up science, because in India there are subjects we have to choose in 11th grade, which is junior year. And they always tell the people to take science or commerce, which are basically two main subjects, you know, which can get you good jobs, and not humanities. And so after all, because they think that every child in India has to either be a doctor, engineer, a surgeon, whatever, a lawyer. They're not allowed to take up creative jobs or creative professions, because again, this won't get them enough pay, this won't get them enough respect in society. Talking about me personally, I'm a really creative person, and I'd really like to, you know, do things that other people don't and explore new interests. But the idea that you just have to you're just limited to a certain possibilities in certain professions just makes me really I don't know, sad, because I can't explore anything out of the general I guess public's interest without being judged to a point where I'm forced to give up what my interests are. So that's kind of, this is how intense it is, stigma attached to academics as well. You're not supposed to do anything that is just you know, out of the box, because that won't get you enough pay or enough respect, and from teachers and parents and whatever people in the general society. And it's been observed that teachers display results to the whole school as a way to encourage hard work through shaming those who get worse scores. But this method also builds anxiety and pressure and low self-esteem, leading students to doubt their abilities. And again, this has happened with me, because the teacher, literally, I scored, I guess, 5 on 10, and she she just you know, grabbed my test paper from my desk and showed it to the whole class, and she said that I'm a failure as a person. And I literally cried the whole day. But
that's awful.
then then the next year I came up to her with like 100 and 100 score, but that's a different thing. I'm not here to brag, but yeah, something like that is just terrible, and I definitely feel it needs to improve, because that just, you know, puts me in a lot of pressure, and just every other student in India, they're just depressed and anxious. It's horrible.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't really know much about East Asian culture. Crystal, would you make me familiar with that, because I really don't know about it, and we'd love to hear something from you.
Yeah. Shoot, sorry, I was muted. So I think you said like wanting to know about like East Asian and Southeast Asian culture, and to be honest, like it's like very similar, honestly, to a lot of the academic pressures that a lot of Indian families have on their children, and just a lot of like Indian students have, with like a few small like differences. I'd say like a lot of, even though like a lot of the academic rigor and like the emphasis on education is the same, I think like there are definitely a few less stereotypes when it comes to East Asian people, because a lot of like East Asian people are now more like commonly seen in places of like big tech and like just technology and like big businesses in general. I think in like the coming years, like there has been less of a stereotype of course there's like still a huge stereotype of like East Asian people being like going into the medical field and becoming doctors and stuff, but because of like more positive portrayal, I guess, of actually, I don't know if it's positive or not. There's a few downsides to it, but that's a whole nother topic. But there has been more like representation of like East Asian people taking up different sorts of like different sorts of career choices, and I think that is good for the community. However, like, because it's good that unlike Indian cultures, like there's not as much of a pressure that Insha talks about to go towards like one specific career, and that's like I don't even know how to emphasize how important that is for like people's students, like teens' mental health, like especially like when I've like, especially like at Each Mind, we have a lot of like other international writers and people that I personally work with. Like it's very easy to see the huge discrepancies between like people's different, I guess, like focus on academics and how much it like consumes their lives, which makes me very conscious of like how their schedules are working and stuff like that. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that I kind of directly see and know about like the harms that Insha was previously talking about, and I'm very thankful that I think in like recent years there's been a little bit less of that stereotype for East Asian people. We have our other problems too. We're still
East Asia.
We're still
advancing.
We're dealing with. This is such a dark joke, but we're dealing with hate crimes from a certain administration now. But anyways, I definitely get like there's still a sense of academic pressure, and more than anything, I think, I don't know if Insha, like this was something that you related to, but after a while, like you're like, for me at least, after a while, my parents kind of like, they didn't directly let go. It was more of like they knew that I kind of like internalized the pressure that they gave me, and because of that, it's like I give more pressure on myself now. And I don't know, Insha, if you like, or even Jordyn, if you like, this is something that has happened to you with like academic pressure from like your specific racial community.
Yeah, I mean, for me, my parents basically now they have like this new thing that they're pressuring me about. So I mean, they're not really pressuring me to be a doctor, and they're like, do whatever you want, but first graduate from a good college. And I can't stress this enough how much it's like literally, it's literally driving me crazy. I'm saying that's literally going to become my catchphrase from now on, because I'm saying that so much. But they focus so much on college, like Harvard, Oxford, Ivy League colleges, and I'm like, okay, I'm just like, I'm a freshman, give me a break. I'm not in my junior year, I'm not in my senior year. But academic pressure is intense. I mean, whenever I'm just like sitting idly doing my work, they come up to me and ask like, what's going on about studies? Why aren't you studying? And I'm always like, I can't always study. It's too pressurizing. But they've calmed down a bit since I've explained it to them, that how challenging school can be. But still, it's a lot of pressure at home, and I definitely think it should get less, because I'll go mad if it doesn't, because it just is what it is. But I have to deal with it.
I totally understand that. I understand, I wouldn't say obviously. Me personally, there hasn't been a lot of academic pressure, but I don't think that's really concern within the Black community, because there is a lot of Black people dropping out because of societal issues, which is a whole nother topic. But I definitely understand how that can put a lot of pressure on your kid, and how that can make your kid feel very depressed or anxious, and as you said, internalize that sort of pressure and put a lot more pressure on yourself, which is awful in general, and especially for those who are just academically challenged, who have learning disabilities that they can't help. Then they're even more stigmatized, like, why are you putting this much pressure on you, somebody who isn't able to have those sort of capabilities as everybody else. So yeah, it's awful, and I understand where you're coming from when you talk about that. I do want to say that was a great discussion. I wanted to touch a little bit on, lastly, about another different stigma within my own Black community. There is a lot of mental health issues related to Black men in general. There's a lot of standards for Black men to be like super tough and to be basically embody the definition of toxic masculinity, which obviously, as we touched on a little bit before, stemmed from a lot of slavery, and especially with Black men being like leaders within their own slave population. Like, I can't say that I'm a history nerd, but I believe there was a lot of like status issues with Black people like taking care of their own slaves-ish. But I'm not gonna go into that because I'm not a history nerd. I don't want to get anything incorrect. But there was this beautiful quote from this article that I read that says, many men have not been told how to process and talk about their emotional experiences, furthering a sense of isolation, anger, and resentment sometimes manifest in seeming shutdown in relationships and friendships, and that can manifest in outward expression of anger and aggression and even violence.
Can I just say that I absolutely love your quotes? Like, where do you get them? Like, they should be on like a website or a t-shirt. Just get them. Like, I love your quotes.
Literally, I almost teared up reading that, because I definitely see a lot of that sort of model within the own Black men that I've seen in my own personal circle. And it's awful because that literally stems from the stigmatization of mental health, and especially how Black men are supposed to be tough, so mental health isn't important, and mental health is weakness, and everything that we talked about wrapped up in a whole little bun. And it creates many men who don't know how to deal with their emotions and who don't feel comfortable showing that side of themselves because they have to be tough all the time. And I did not say this disclaimer before, but I am not a man, so I cannot speak for Black men's experiences. So I definitely want you to go research about that and learn for yourself. But it's definitely something that should be talked more about.
And yeah, media makes it kind of worse because, again, there's a stigma, as you just talked about, right? That, Black men have to be tough. I mean, I'm not Black, but I could definitely see what's happening around the world. Media makes it so, media makes it worse by, again, portraying Black people in their movies and their songs a certain way that, the rest of the, basically to talk about the white population, they treat, of course, media plays such a huge role in today's life that, of course, people will get impacted by them, right? Especially white people, if we talk about in this case specifically, they get influenced by what's been told in a certain movie, in a certain show, in a certain song, and then they sort of apply that stigma in reality, and that just makes it worse for the people around them, because of course that stigma is not real, it's just in a movie because it's a stigma. So I think movies should kind of touch upon this idea that this shouldn't be the case. Stigmas are stigmas, but they should be sort of we need to escape out of those stigmas, because that just makes life difficult for everyone. The stigmas attached to the people who are attached. Oh my god, I'm so sorry, I was literally out of breath.
It's okay.
The stigma, people who the stigmas are attached to, and people who are talking about stigmas and other stuff. So it just makes life difficult for both of these people, and again, it needs to improve, because not everyone can be tough always, and we need to realize that, because even though you might be the toughest and the most strongest and invincible person on the planet, but maybe you would definitely cry someday, you would feel sad someday, and it's okay, because these are all human emotions and we need to feel them. You can't just suppress your emotions because you want to appear tough, because that would make you appear weaker. If you, it's important to talk about your feelings openly and express them fully. That's what makes you a stronger person, instead of suppressing them, because that just shows that you're afraid to sort of be embarrassed, because there's nothing to be embarrassed about. It's just your emotions, and they need to be oh my god, you need to set them free, and you need to express them openly without any fear of judgment, even though there might be some, but just don't care about it. Express them, because being strong every time is just not the option, and feeling sad, feeling down or low is definitely okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And go ahead.
I was gonna say,
I have a problem.
No, it's okay. I was gonna say, if you do want to learn more about that, there's a few books talking about Black men and mental health. There's one called We Real Cool: Black Men and Masculinity and Mascupathy. I don't know how to pronounce that word. Understanding and Healing the Malice of American Manhood. So definitely would recommend those. Just to move on a bit, we will then be touching on how society views each community in regards to mental health, because there's definitely a lot there as well.
Yeah.
And I will pass this off to Crystal.
Yeah, so we wanted first to talk about like how a lot of the stereotypes of like the model minority myth affects the mental health of like specifically Asian communities. So just in case like you haven't heard about the model minority myth before in the past, the model minority myth basically is this idea that like Asian people are like the quote unquote best minority or like the best race. And number one, that obviously doesn't exist, but number two, it has like the huge effect of hurting like a lot of Asian communities along with like hurting non-Asian communities. And this is because like by giving that like pressure to be like quote unquote the perfect minority or like the good minority, big quotation marks, that like creates this effect that Asian people need to be perfect, and that pressure that we need to be perfect, like with what Insha was just talking about how like her community with like the Indian community has like a huge pressure to be like perfect, to be like the perfect minority, to excel in school, to get a good job, to like move up social like up the social mobility ladder, like everything to be perfect. And with my I'm Indonesian and Chinese and also Taiwanese, but with my community it's like sort of the same thing, right? Like being like the best, good in like piano, good in orchestra, good at a few sports, good like leader, like everything needs to be up there. And what that does to other communities, it makes this like sort of comparison effect that a lot of white people and a lot of non-Asian people and even Asian people start pitting Asian people versus non-Asian people and putting Asian people on a pedestal compared to, and that means putting Asian people on a pedestal turns into putting everyone else like underneath. And that creates a lot of like clashes and conflicts between races, and you'll see that was happening a lot when like the Stop AAPI hate movement was going. Like a lot of Asian communities have huge anti-black stereotypes that they've created due to like white supremacy perpetrating this idea that they are like the better race. And these like a lot of these Asian people, I know like these people in my life, and I know that they're like hugely misguided and hugely like victims of this like myth, and that turns like our whole sort of like communities against each other, and it's just terrible in a lot of ways.
Yeah, they always generalize the Asian people on one side. So for basically people, it's always Asian people on one side and the rest of the population on the other, just as you said. So on one side there are Asian people, are supposedly perfect human beings on planet, and good at academics and good at everything, and others just treat them as if they are. So I mean, if an Asian, for example, they score less in their exams, or if they are not doing that well academically, or just prospering in their life, they're like, people kind of look down upon them, like, oh, you're Asian, why aren't you doing this, why aren't you doing that? So that just kind of puts pressure on them to appear perfect all the time, because they're afraid, first of all, what might their families kind of tell them, because so for families, basically, it's like, I've seen in shows, I've seen around that you're Indian, why aren't you scoring full in mathematics, right? Why aren't you scoring full marks in your exams? Why aren't you acting like this weird nerdy kid? I've seen that in shows. So that just, again, puts portrays as if Indians, or I mean just Asian people as such, have to be perfect all the time. Otherwise, just that won't be you won't be classified as an Asian person. You won't be a good ideal Asian person if you're not living up to these expectations that people have for you. That just, yeah. And it just hurts the community and the people, and makes them feel down, inferior, and again affects their health, because this is also a really important issue when it comes to minority mental health, specifically Asian mental health, if we talk about, because there's a lot of factors that influence their idea of not opening up about their mental health, and it's definitely one of the biggest ones. And that we could see, because it happens all the time that Asian people specifically, they don't speak up because all these factors taken into consideration.
Absolutely. I do want to also add to that a little bit. When the Stop AAPI, is that how you say it? I'm sorry, AAPI? Okay. Okay, when that movement was going on, I didn't want to say it incorrectly. When that movement was going on, there was a lot of clash between the Black community and the Asian community specifically. I know that I literally saw it with my own eyes. My mother was very like, well, they didn't support us beforehand, so we're not gonna support them. So I feel like there's a lot of jealousy. Yeah, I hated that so much.
Yeah,
I hated it
it's
with
kind of
the
like how I saw anti-Black racism within the Asian community, and you were seeing anti-Asian racism within like the Black community because of stupid white supremacy. But sorry, go on.
And we hate white supremacy separating us because we need to be strong together. A few things in regards to the Black community and how society views our mental health. It does go back to a little bit about masculinity and the topic of being resilient and things like that, and especially with the thug/drug dealer stereotype. There's definitely the stereotype that exists that all Black people are strong and that all Black people are resilient, and they don't feel as much as any other person. Well, I should say any other white person specifically, because minority mental health is very not talked about. But there's also just this, the darker the skin color, the tougher you are, which also stems back to the paper bag test, which occurred in the 1900s to 1950s, where the test allegedly was used to determine certain privileges by comparing a person's skin tone to a paper bag, which basically it was absolutely awful, because it's literally a paper bag. Do you not know the range Black people have as far as skin color goes? Because we cannot fit that. So as far as just like always over masculizing us and always trying to appeal to white people and having a lighter skin tone, which can be internalized and also just make people with darker skin tones feel awful, makes people with lighter skin tones feel like they have certain privileges. Well, there is light skin privilege, but overall it just hurts everyone in the process, especially when they're dehumanizing us and making us seem like, again, just overly masculine, and like we're animals, and comparing us to literal monkeys, which happened so much during slavery and still happens today, that it's just built a lack of empathy, and it all just stems from slavery. And why? Why are these issues still occurring today is all I'm asking.
This is like a relatable thing. Crystal basically talked about like Asian mental health, and you talked about Black people mental health. I mean, Indians are a part of Asian, but they're kind of a different thing going on with Indians as such. So I'll talk a bit more about the Indian idea. So basically in India, outside India, when people are living, Indians basically, so they're viewed as inferior. As we talked about before, Asians are supposed to be those perfect, quotation perfect individual. individuals who like excel in everything, but even if they excel in everything, they are those nerdy weird kids with like a thick accent who can't just seem to get it, like just they are really socially, like they're wallflowers basically, if I in a nutshell. Indians, how American think of Indians, they're just like a wallflower, nothing else but a wallflower. And in India and outside India, it's like Indians have this one option, like two options basically, all or nothing. So either they excel or flourish, just like they're doing extremely well. They're getting a good pay, and their families, taking care of their families, getting a good car, good house, or they're just sitting there trying to explore their creative pursuits, and they're struggling and they're poor. So these are just two basic things, how Indians are viewed as. They're either black or white. In Indian society as well, it's either black or white. It's either you choose to do what everyone else is doing and you kind of get a good pay or just live a normal life, or you choose to do something else, like thing other than normal, and then you struggle or you become poor. And even if people who are famous, they're doing extremely well, people might view them as like they alienate famous people for some reason. In India, if a person is famous, they're talking about them being famous because they obviously explored the creative part of your profession that you can probably take up. So the celebrities, they're always alienated. They're treated as if they're like, okay, there's some different people from different planets. They're always treated differently because they chose to do something else other than what normal what every other person does in India, right? So it's just a terrible thing outside as well. If an Indian person isn't doing well outside India, they're like made fun of because they're like, oh, you're an Indian people, why aren't you like doing well in school, why aren't you getting awards, getting recognition? And this is just, again, media influence a lot of things. And most time in American films, they have Indian characters that are poor, which oftentimes portray them as inferior. It enforces the idea that all Indians are poor. Other times, movies have a white savior character who helps them overcome poverty or an important issue that is degrading and rooted in white supremacy. So, I mean, we just talked about white supremacy, right? So that affects Indians equally as it does to every other community or minority living in America. First of all, Indians, to just classify a certain, I guess, a nationality as poor, like, that's not correct, because there are, again, lots of people, lots of culture, lots of different financial backgrounds and statuses, and just to classify all of them as poor and uncultured is just as bad as it can get. And again, just to speak for myself, I don't think any Indian needs a white person to come and save them, because I think like every other minority, we are capable enough to do stuff on our own, and we don't need other people to tell us that we're not capable or we're not enough or we can't do this stuff, because we're also like every other person. We're also like white people. We're also people. We also have the same thing as them. We also live the same as them. And we can do stuff on our own without their help. We can be our own saviors. We don't need white people to come and tell us that, you can't do this on your own and we're going to do it for you. So this is something that is deeply rooted in, I think, American culture, especially Indians who are living in America. They kind of face this a lot, that they're treated as inferior in schools. There's, a lot of bullying culture that I felt. I attended a conference and they were like, treating me so differently, and I was like, okay, I'm a dip out of that place, because that wasn't it. So that's what I've actually experienced with white people, that they sort of treat Indians a bit differently. I'm sorry, I'm just like generalizing, that's not a good thing to do, but for me, basically, what I've experienced so far with a couple of things, that's just not the case.
I totally understand where you're coming from.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and also sometimes, when I'm talking to people from different countries, and that just makes me feel like, even if it's just subconsciously, it just makes me feel like a little bit of little bit awkward, a little bit weird to just talk to them, because I mean, I'm always concerned about what they might think because of the stigmas attached to Indian people, you know, living outside India. So it just makes me a bit weird and awkward to talk to them. But I'm fine, I'm doing better because I'm talking to people from different countries like you guys are amazing. So that just makes me feel better and amazing. Thank you guys.
I'm glad that you're feeling better. All right, thank you so much, Insha, for sharing that story. I definitely agree with the white supremacy and sort of white savior aspect, because I've definitely had that experience in my lifetime. Please learn your place. I don't need you. No, I'm kidding. I didn't mean to. Please, that was a joke for anybody who just got offended. I'm sorry. But we did touch a little bit about our own stories previously in this episode. So all I want to say is your story matters, and please share your stories with those that are uneducated. We do want to wrap up this episode. We have a website. If you don't know, our website is bloompod.wixsite.com/podcast, and you can find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, all at Forever Bloom Pod, plus on TikTok at Forever Blooming Podcast. The research and transcript for this episode is on Forever Blooming's website in the extra section, and our podcast guest form is in our episode section. If you want to be on Forever Blooming, as well as Crystal here, thank you so much for coming. Finally, I love that we had this conversation with you.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So, also our audience spotlight form is in our episode section, where you can ask for advice to be featured in one of our episodes. That is sort of new. I think I announced this last time. But our email is management@foreverbloompod.org. Let us know your thoughts, questions, and how we can improve the podcast, because we love hearing from you. And be sure to check out our link tree in the description for all those quick and accessible links. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and share with your friends if you enjoyed this episode. And have a great day, afternoon, or night whenever you're listening to this. Thanks for tuning in.